Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show, everybody. I'm Ed Berliner, sitting in for Steve, along with Diane Diamond. Thank you so much for joining us. The race card has now been played in the minds of many, thanks to Eric Holder. So we now welcome in from the Root.com, where he is the columnist and contributing editor, to discuss this as well and get some more opinion on it. David Swerdlick joins us on the show today. David, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Diane.
David, let's start right out here. When the Attorney General makes statements such as these, you would have to then imagine that he feels emboldened by the fact that his boss has got his back and he can pretty much say whatever he wants, regardless of race card issues or how it may sound to an entire American electorate.
Well, I think he understands that we're at 6 years into an 8-year presidency and that he feels clearly comfortable speaking his mind, certainly to the National Action Network, feels comfortable last week kind of going in a tit-for-tat with members of Congress in a committee. Eric Holder has been, over the years, a little sharper edged about his comments on race than the president has, and at this point, clearly he doesn't see any need to hold back. I have been critical in the past with some of the things that Eric Holder has said, that the Attorney General has said, maybe stepping out of turn where he might otherwise have just held his fire. In this particular case, though, I do think he has a point, Ed, where he's basically saying he's been treated with disrespect, President Obama's been treated with disrespect. I think it's an open debate about whether it's racial in nature, but I don't think it's an open debate about the fact that they have been disrespected by members of Congress, particularly Republicans.
Well, let's go there. Attorney generals before have not exactly been treated well in front of Congress, and certainly the president seems to be getting fair treatment from both sides these days, as Obamacare has its issues and so many other polls seem to indicate that his popularity is slipping. So if you could explain a little bit more into that, into how he might have a point.
Well, I think when you talk about Holder, again, his situation is a little more complicated. And I think that, can be more debatable. Attorney General Holder, right, there was a lot of contentiousness around Fast and Furious, around the new Black Panther Party.
But he's brought it on himself, correct, David?
Around Guantanamo Bay. I don't think he's brought it on himself in a lot of those instances. I will put one instance definitely on him, going all the way back to 2009, the brand new administration. He gave that speech where he talked about Americans being a nation of cowards when it comes to the national dialogue on race. I think he sort of opened up the box on that one when it was really not his sort of moment to speak that frankly on the issue of race. He did draw some fire on that needlessly. There have been other instances, though, like if you take Fast and Furious, where, he had not done what Congress wanted him to do on that issue. He wound up having to apologize. He did apologize in a letter to Congress over the way that had been investigated, not on the substance of it. But I think members of Congress on the Republican side have continued in the House to go after him on a lot of, sort of peripheral stuff, and I don't think that's been warranted. When you talk about the president, though, I think we've seen a situation where when you talk about Congressman Joe Wilson with "you lie," when you talk about some other instances, there has really been a ratcheting up of this refusal to accord President Obama even the base level of respect that the office would dictate. And so I think there's a point here.
I think it's a good point here, David, because Diane wants to come in here, but let's stick to Eric Holder for a minute. Go ahead.
Let's stick to Eric Holder here.
Sure, okay.
And I'm with you on that whole thing of, we're a nation of cowards. That was a bad way to start off, in my opinion.
Okay.
But he is the top cop. He is the top cop in the United States of America, and I want to know why his Justice Department has not prosecuted one financial wizard who helped bring about the housing crisis. Not one person connected to the gun running Fast and Furious was out of a job. In fact, they were promoted within the DOJ. And I'm going to bet you $1 box of donuts that if the Congress does what I think they're going to do, and they're going to recommend a criminal probe on Lerner from the IRS, that's going to go nowhere in Holder's DOJ. That's my complaint with him. He's not being the top cop for all of us.
Well, let me take those in reverse order. If you talk about the IRS issue, and this is not one that I've done a great deal of reporting on, I was also critical of the administration to a degree when this first came to light. But I think that, when you look at the way the Republicans are handling this, if it comes out at some point that there's a connection to the White House, to a political motivation for this, then I think there's something there for House Republicans to go after. As long as this is something that's in-house with the IRS,
somebody's head
I'm not
should
sure why they're
roll.
approaching this. I'm sorry, go ahead, Diane.
Somebody's head should roll. Somebody should be punished for using the IRS for political gain. I don't care if it was attached to the White House or not. There just doesn't seem to be any accountability in this administration when it comes to these scandals. Look what happened with the housing crisis, and not one person was prosecuted. This is not what the DOJ is all about.
Well, look, Diane, I think the housing crisis is a strange one to look at in terms of accountability. I don't think there are too many economists, too many people familiar with the business community, too many people on the Hill who would come out and say that we would have been better off 2009, 2010, going back 5 or 6 years, if we had not had TARP, if we had not sort of figured out a way to patch things up, in the financial sector, if we had been frog marching people from Wall Street before Congress or into courts to try and get people, locked up, shackled up, stripped of their positions, stripped of money. I don't think there's too many people out there arguing that the recovery, such as it is, even as weak as it is, would be better off in this country if the administration had focused on that rather than on trying to stimulate growth, breathe life back into the Dow Jones.
Okay, well, we're into an entirely different discussion here right now. We've really gone off the rails here and gone into an entirely different discussion when this is really a little bit about the playing of the race card here, which seems to be the issue that has America polarized at this moment here. And I want you to hear a soundbite from Britt Hume on Sunday where he talked about this and even mentioned, in his opinion, that to President Obama and Attorney General Holder, that they have benefited enormously by being black, saying race is a shield and a sword. Here's the clip.
That both Eric Holder and Barack Obama have benefited politically enormously from the fact that they are African American and the first to hold the jobs that they hold. And this, I don't know if he specifically meant race or not. I suspect perhaps he did. But to those two men, race has been both a shield and a sword.
David, let's leave it to you then, a shield and a sword. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I like Britt Hume. I've interacted with him on Twitter. He's a very smart guy. He's obviously an experienced journalist. I think he's trying to take a bite out of the president and the attorney general here on race in a situation where, President Obama, for all the attacks he's weathered over the last 5 or 6 years about his character, being a socialist, whatever it is, he has brought up race, I think, frankly, very seldom. And so I think for Britt Hume to bring that up as the president using it frequently as a shield and a sword is inaccurate, and I think it's just him trying to get in on the pile-on.
But is it not fair to say, though, David, very short time we have left, that there is a part of this country that every time you criticize the president specifically, you are going to be looked at as doing it on a racial issue first, instead of it being economic, political, social? They will always go to race. You have to agree with that.
Well, I understand the question you're asking, but I just think that conservatives have made too much out of times when, say, liberals or liberal commentators have talked about race as a criticism of some of the criticism that the president gets. Some of it is racial in nature and some of it is not. And you have to take these things on a case-by-case basis. We've gotten to this point where if Democrats are too sensitive to race, then Republicans are too sensitive to race being brought up at all, so I just think that this was off base when you talk about what Britt Hume said, what George Will said on Fox this weekend. I think Republicans need to toughen up on this issue. They're the ones who are not trusted by a large percentage of the minority electorate, and so they're the ones who are going to have to figure it out.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. David Swerdlick, thank you very much for joining us, and I have a feeling that we have not heard the end of this conversation in any way, shape, form. David, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right. It is fascinating because still it comes down to the fact that it doesn't make a difference what you say. There are still people who are always going to point it to race regardless.
Go back to the race. But David does make a good point that maybe Republicans are a little too sensitive about it too. I still think Eric Holder is not the best AG we ever had.
Pete Hoekstra and Grace Marie Turner are going to join us. The panel continues right next on NewsMaxTV.com.